now I see. Yeah. All right. Okay, so it's 9:30, 32. So we can start. Yes. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Neuroccino. We are in the second week of June, and our speaker today is Lilith with an interesting paper about brain asymmetry, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now 1 second. Okay. And now I give you the permission to share. Okay. Now you should be able to share the screen. Perfect. And if you can also send us the link in the chat, is perfect. Okay. So when you want, you can start.
Hello. So you see my screen. Everything is okay. So today I want you to show this paper. It's relatively fresh. Couple of months ago, it was published in Cortex by one author, Guido Gainotti. He's a professor from Rome. And this is a historical paper, and it is focused on hemispheric asymmetries. So first, when I saw this, I thought it's going to be about structural asymmetry, but there will be nothing about white matter or gray matter asymmetry between in brain. It is more about functional lateralization. So functional hemispheric asymmetry. It's about lateralization of such functions such as language or and emotions mainly. So this is, I think, a very interesting and unusual paper because it really goes deep into history and digs out all the important and sometimes not so much mentioned historical figures that played crucial role in the development of neuropsychology and neuroscience. So the way he starts, he describes on one side the discovery of Broca, the famous story that all of us, I think, are pretty familiar with. And it's nice that he mentions also some names like Dax, who was actually the person, a neurosurgeon during the war, who observed many soldiers with left hemisphere lesions. And it was that person who said that probably due to the lesion of the left hemisphere, we get language disorders. So it was kind of empirical observation that gives rise that our discovery of language, that language is lateralized on the left hemisphere. Because in the beginning, it was Broca, the way usually it is told, this story, that Broca was the one who attributed the lateralization, which is true, but long time before, there was this person who noted this fact. So yeah, he's talking about that and says that it started with a empirically driven idea, knowledge, but then there was theory-driven approach where came in play Wernicke and predicted the idea of conduction aphasia. So these things already started develop in a theory-driven manner, the way author describes it, but it started with empirical discovery. And then the next section, he sort of in parallel, but not parallel, it talks about the discovery of the right lateralization of emotions. So this story I don't hear a lot of times, and it was really interesting to me to see what happened in that period. So there was this professor, Luis, and he was the one who kind of attributed it to the center of emotions to the right hemisphere. He was really impressed by the works on language of the work of Broca on language for the left hemisphere. And also he was interested and noted that something is happening not as usual if there is a lesion in the right hemisphere with emotions. So people become either unaware at all, which was later called as anosognosia, or people can become aware of what is happening, but be indifferent to their deficit. So this is another term, and it is called anosodiaphoria. So these are two things, and for some reason, it wasn't so much popular, this topic, the research on emotions. And it's for 80 years, there was not so much discovery. There was no, people were not focusing on this. It was mainly, it seems, the language side, this research. But then when people were able to use pharmacological inactivation of the left or right hemisphere, here people started to notice more and more different type of reaction of patients in terms of emotions. So this observation that when you inactivate the right hemisphere, people become, as author says, getting an abnormal reaction to the deficit. So they are either indifferent or unaware what is happening and ignore their deficit. And if you inactivate the left hemisphere, they get language problems, right? But also in terms of emotions, they are labeled depressive catastrophic reactions. So it's something that you would expect from a person who has a really like experienced bad event in his life, like a stroke, for example. So these these observations led to two different hypotheses about lateralization of emotions. And there were two of them. One of them is the valence hypothesis, and the other one is a right hemisphere hypothesis. So I can talk about this after I talk about the paper, but in general, in the next section, he just provides the research that has been done, and most of the research, as I understand, according to this author, has more empirical evidence for the right hemisphere dominance hypothesis, which is about that emotions are lateralized in a right hemisphere. And right hemisphere is the hemisphere that supports that center, sort of. Yeah, so what we have here, we have on one side lateralization of language on the left, and then lateralization of emotions on the right. The next section, author starts to talk about, like, this was really interesting because he started to mention and discuss a lot about work of Jackson, Hewlett Jackson. It's a neurologist who I don't think, in my opinion, it's not so I cannot put his name alongside names such as Broca, Littgame, or Wernicke, because he was thinking in a different categories in different dimensions, sort of. Because Littke and Wernicke, they were talking about the production and comprehension language in terms of production and comprehension, while Jackson, he was more about in a different categories like propositional versus automatic speech production. So what is that and why is it so different? So the idea is that if we go back to the patient of Broca even, right? So the famous patient Leborn, or his nickname Tan. So he got this nickname because he was actually producing speech. He was saying Tan Tan. And it's not written in this paper, but he was also using blasphemes. So he was swearing. So these things are speech and they are called automatisms. So they are some overlearned phrases or words that we hear a lot during our life, and they are imprinted in our vocabulary. So another examples are our names or counting from 1 to 10. So these are automatisms, and even in the patient of Broca, he had some level of automatic speech production. And if we go to Jackson theory now about propositional versus automatic speech production, we will see that we can now explain why Broca's patient had this ability spared. Why? Because Jackson, he says that automatic speech production is supported by both hemispheres, the left and right hemisphere, while propositional speech productions is supported only with the left hemisphere. So if we have a lesion in the left hemisphere, we will have a problem with propositional speech. Yes, we will have a problem with automatic speech. It's not that the person will always speak and never have any problems with the automatic speech production. No, it will have, but then we have the right hemisphere who has some sort of spared that will allow to the patient to still use like this involuntary automatic immediate reactions that usually we try to suppress when we are in a public and so on and so forth. So this is a nice idea, and I think you can feel also that it is a different dimension of talking about language, because usually when we say that where is language, we always mainly most of the work say it's left hemisphere. But this little nuance about automatic speech production, I think it's not so much mentioned nowadays. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong actually. So yeah. So this was that thing that, and yeah, just to clarify, propositional, like it's a speech when, for example, when now I'm talking, I'm telling you a story, or when we communicate with each other, creating new sentences, and we are using some syntactic processes, while in automatic speech production, or sometimes called non-propositional, these are the type when we not necessarily need the syntactic processes to produce these words. They are automatic and immediate. Yeah, so I think you understood this idea. Yeah, and then he talks about that this dichotomy kind of between propositional and automatic, you can find not only at the level of speech, but also at the level of gestures. So we can see the same kind of pattern with movements. So some automatic movements can be spared, and learning new and producing new gestures will be impact. So it's nice that you can see this dichotomy at different levels of cognition. So yeah, this is was about that. Oh, it's 9 for okay, 1 second, I go super quick. So yeah, and then he just talks about 3 main hemispheric syndromes on the right hemispheric syndromes. So this is the anosognosia that I already talked about. Then he talks about neglect, which is, I think, actually a bit simplification, because it's not only the right hemisphere syndrome. Like there are cases of the left when you get this neglect when you have a damage of the left hemisphere. And he talks also about prosopagnosia, which is another syndrome when you lose familiarity with faces, or sometimes it's also you can lose not only familiarity with faces but also familiarity with voice of person. Yeah, so quickly, and I didn't understand why there was only one section for a little section when he actually talks about the mechanisms that he put in the title of the lateralization, and he lists here three lateralization mechanisms, functional mechanisms. And I feel like he needed more space to explain this because it seems that all these 3 mechanisms, they are complementary to each other, the way he put it, and they are not contradicting each other. And one of the mechanisms said that we have lateralization because we need to avoid conflicts between these 2 alternative neural control systems, language-shaped cognition and emotions. The second mechanism is about that our language shaped our cognition and thought. Here he does some association with Russian and French, I think, psychologists, Piaget and Vygotsky. It's also nice that he mentioned those big figures. And then and the last mechanism is that he mentions here figures such as De Renzi and Gazzaniga, and the idea is that when language developed on the left side of the brain, right hemisphere areas homologous to those involved in language processing in the left hemisphere remain dedicated to more basic sensory motor functions. So yeah, I couldn't actually I couldn't connect all these pieces, and I think it's a really big paper with a lot of theories and ideas, and I feel like it needed like at least 2 other papers to explain, because there is one part when he discusses theory-driven and empirical-driven theory, and then he goes to clinical syndromes, and then he also goes deep into historical, and then he goes back to 3 big lateralization mechanisms. So it's really compact, and I needed more reading about this to be able to connect all puzzles together. But I hope I didn't confuse you and give some interesting just pieces of information, historical points that maybe will make you think this next week. I don't know. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lilith. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's really interesting, this paper, yes, and it's really nice to hear about the history also. So now, fellow participants, do you have any questions? Just unmute or raise your hand or write in the chat. Yes, I see. someone.
Thank you, Lilith, for the historical paper. I think it's always nice to have like a historical literature reminder sometimes in the Neuroccino. So maybe it's a bit out of the scope of the paper, but I think it's a good opportunity to ask this question also to you guys. Do you think anosognosia exists, meaning that there is so many manifestation of anosognosia? In the paper, you mentioned the anosognosia toward disease, more bodily related disease with the Babinski example, but there are many forms, also anosognosia for aphasia and anosognosia for memory deficit. So my question is, can we speak about anosognosia as a unitary model, or is just the similar symptoms but of different syndromes?
Well, that's a really good question. Yeah, this paper doesn't discuss so much this topic in a sense of if it is unitary syndrome or it is just a little symptom that complementary to bigger syndromes. As I understand, that's the question, right? Yeah, so I honestly don't know, but the way he talks about it here, he says that anosognosia can also be specific to specific deficits. So it's like you can have you can ignore one deficit and be aware of another one. It's not that you globally just ignore everything. It's an interesting mechanism, and as the way as I see this logic in this paper, it's an adaptive system, and it kind of helps a person to go through the
Exactly, he speaks about it with the emotional approach, so it's an
so it's more it's
compensation.
some the cool thing that he puts this emotion and language like as adaptive systems. And sometimes I think that I don't know if you have any ideas about if we have to consider it the whole syndrome. I never read the proper paper. I mean, like I never read lots of papers about anosognosia, so I'm not sure what scientific community actually
like
thinks about
the emotional approach that he mentions in the paper. He really explains it as a unitary syndrome. So you have an emotional imbalance, and this might explain the manifestation in all the different syndrome. But we know that a syndrome is very complex, so it comes with many symptoms. So why the patient would acknowledge some of the symptoms and ignore, they're not aware of other? Like, is it the emotional value that they put in the in the specific symptom, or is there something else? And so I'm in these days I'm reasoning about this.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know, but it's definitely an interesting line of research, I think, to think if why sometimes some people ignore one deficit and the other one is not. Maybe there is some specific mechanism that is touched with the lesion. I don't know. But the thing that in this paper is that the emotion center is located in right hemisphere, and that you can have indifference to your disease, which is called another term, and it can be specific to specific things. But there is no discussion about this, and if you put it this also here, like for sure this paper would have exploded because there are lots of ideas here. But I think it's a separate paper, and it will be interesting to read about it.
Okay, thank you, Lily.
Thank you.
All right. I forgot my question. I was thinking about the question of Valentina. I don't remember what I wanted to ask. But regarding what you said, Valentina, it depends like what is the model that people have, the functioning of the brain. If if emotion are localized, and how can you even have anosognosia? I mean, and if you have areas that are sensitive to emotion in the way they organize it like a library, so you have those map, dimension map of emotion. The only way you can feel emotion is by representing it through the connection with other areas that will represent the stream of consciousness as we live it every day. So if you different those emotion representation map from the representation from the stream of consciousness, then you might have anosognosia for those emotions, but not anything else, or only part of the emotion according to the way your brain is organized.
So it's not that consciousness or awareness is modular. It's actually emotion that is modular, and then it will lead to different manifestation of awareness and awareness.
I mean, I thought about this recently on the organization of the cortex and the neurons. But if you look at the way the cortex is organized for the little part that we understand, it's always organized into maps. So you have like tonotopic map, you have a retinotopic map, you have spatiotopic map, you have value map in the orbitofrontal cortex. You probably have those emotional maps, which are like, it's a huge encyclopedia of neurons that are next to each other that are sensitive to something.
That's an interesting.
But that's not because it's located there that the function is there. It has to be connected with something else in order to, you walk through these stories that is in the brain by connecting those maps together. That's what I thought about recently. And then disconnecting some of those paths create those, syndrome as we see it, which can be, anosognosia of emotion or faces, or the inability to speak or understand through the differentiation or destruction of the map representation of where it lands. It's recent crazy thoughts.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It should be expanded.
Try to do that one day. That's it for me.
Okay. Yes, we are also, it's 10:02. Okay. So thank you to everyone for attending. And so have an exciting science week, and see you at the next Neuroccino with another interesting paper to know.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thanks.